There we go. I think we're finally live. Let's see. We are up and running, maybe?
Yes, we are.
Okay, cool. There we are. Hi, everybody. It's been a while. Sorry that it's been so long since episode 13 and 14. I don't know. I just let pandemic get in the way. It seems like every day is a month. Every week is a minute. I am so discombobulated on time. I can't even begin to tell you. But in any event, I'm excited to get a hang with two of my very, very, very dear friends. So just before I introduce them, let me tell you why they're here. So Summit is coming up for like the GP user group, GPUG, NAVUG, BCUG, and I am doing some pre-con training for Power BI. If you're interested, then you can send me a link in the chat and I'll send you the link. But I want to do the training on a combination of BC data and GP data, since I'm very likely to have people from both of those targets with me. And as a result, I thought, let me invite some people together and we can work on building this data set together. And so the very first two people I thought of, it happened to be women, so that makes me very excited that we got an all-chick call today. So this is just us hanging out, doing what we would normally do if we just had a meeting between the three of us. So you're just welcome to sit in if you like. So I'll start with the GP person, the one on the left. Yep, my dear friend Jen Kuntz from Canada. She's been teaching me to say A for a couple of years now, so I think I have that down. Although I do still say process, Jen, instead of process.
Oh, yeah, you're okay. I'll let you wear with it.
Thank you very much. And you notice the difference of where we're located. It's August, and she's got on a sweatshirt, and I have on a sleeveless shirt. And then, of course, the person who is in the Colorado mountains has on a cotton long sleeve shirt. Another dear friend, Kristen Hosman, who is a BC MVP. So Jen's a GP MVP, Kristen's a BC MVP. And so, hi, Kristen.
Hello, Belinda. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. You kind of straddle the fence for GP and BC, but
what is GP?
Yeah, you're just wearing your BC hat today.
Don't get your pass.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So we're going to be creating a data set. So let me pull up my pull up some of the data. So let's take a look at the general ledger data first. Oh, let me see if I can, well, we'll pull you guys up whenever we start chatting. But so Jen very kindly gave me access to 6 different tables: the GL accounts, GL transactions, customers, receivables, vendors, and payables. And so I see you got these from the SQL view. So these are out of the box views, right?
Yes.
Cool.
Yeah, they are definitely out of the box. They also allow you to very quickly build things that have friendly names. A lot of the field names in the actual raw tables are 8 characters, cryptic, because when GP first was built, you were limited by the length of a field size in a table. So it combines open and history in some cases, depending on what you're looking at, which is useful instead of having multiple tables to deal with. So it's a quick way to get started for anybody that just wants to get familiar with the data.
Cool, cool. Thanks so much. Thanks so much. And then Kristen brought or sent some BC data. Oh, yeah, BC data. And so your BC data are tables: the GL accounts, GL entry, customer ledger entry, vendor, and vendor ledger entry. So Kristen, I see you have the table numbers here. So this looks like you pulled it from the web services. Is that right?
I actually pulled it this time just using a configuration package because I knew what the tables were and I wanted to pull it all at once rather than having to do 6 or 7 different different things. So this was just a quicker way to grab it using that configuration package.
Well, aren't you some kind of bad you-know-what? That's awesome. I love that you did that. And these are actually very comparable tables to our data sets, comparable to what's in the GP views. So one of the big differences being, let me pull you guys back up. This is going to make me crazy. I got to figure out how to do my screens better. One of the things that's very different is GP's on-prem. So GP is pulling from SQL Server, where BC is in the cloud, the SaaS version. So it's pulling from the SaaS version. But the tables, I would assume, I don't know if you work with any on-prem Business Central. Do you, Kristen?
I have, but mostly SaaS.
Yeah, okay. I haven't worked with any Business Central on-prem, but for NAV, they're very much the same kind of table. So regardless of which one you're using, NAV, BC on-prem, I'm sure, and Business Central in the SaaS, those are all going to be pretty much the same. One of the differences that you saw was that BC is calling the transactions a ledger as opposed to just the transactions, which is what GP calls. So it's going to be interesting talking about the different naming conventions that are used for the different products. So I'm going to minimize you guys for a second, and I am going to open up a blank workbook, and I'm going to I did not mean to notice I meant to close those out. Okay, so we're going to create one single combination. I do have BC and GP up and loaded in case something should, in case we need to look at something or decide we want to look at something. We don't have to spend time logging in. Not that it takes that long, but yeah. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and connect to my data so we can get these data sets. So I'm going to click on the data tab in Excel. I'm using Excel Office 365, and I'm actually going to get these from Excel. I think let's do it this way. So I'm just going to click on Get Data, go to File, and get it from Workbooks. So we'll start with the first one, and let me find my workbook. Sorry. You can see I've got multiple monitors, and so I'm a little bit all over the place. But you guys know that's just the way I hang it, and I'm always all over the place. I forgot someone so I'm in a Saturday morning learning group, and somebody asked a question about how we learn or how we do something, and my answer was I fly by the seat of my pants. So that was my answer. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get the GP data first, and then we'll get the BC data. So you notice that we have here the tables that were in Excel, and then we have the tabs in Excel. So I'm going to go ahead and get all the tables. I don't think I want table 7. I think table 7 was just the source. Yeah, it was just the source. Okay, and that being done, I'm going to just click on Transform. You should always go straight into Transform, and once we get into Transform, then I'm going to connect to the Business Centrals. Now, I'm assuming, ladies, that you both got this from the Fabricam and the Contoso company.
Oh no, it's client data. Can you imagine? Oops.
Oh, I missed something, didn't I? What did I miss? Vendors. I missed vendors. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yep, I missed vendors. Okay, so
It's most definitely Fabricam data.
Yeah, okay. And then you got yours from
Kronos.
Kronos. Yeah. Okay. I forgot the vendors. Let me go back and get the vendors. Oh, they're there. Okay. Now that I've got the...
It's interesting in itself, just you doing that first part. When you browse out, it shows the tab names and the table names, and it looks a little confusing, but there's a very subtle icon difference.
Yes. That's a good point. So let's look at that when I connect to the BC data. And
Because you knew which ones to pick.
Yes. So this icon is a table icon. And this one, although very, very small, you could see there are tabs underneath. And the tabs underneath represent that is the worksheet. And weirdly enough, so like this worksheet, we got customer ledger entry. I don't know if this is the same one. One of these is customer ledger entry. And
customer ledger entry is going to be number 21.
21.
Which, oh, that's interesting. It doesn't.
I had cheated because what I did to load mine is I loaded from SQL Server and then disconnected the query, so it auto-named the tables with the friendly names, which made it a little bit easier.
Oh,
kind of like cheating.
Yeah. I don't know which one is. Oh, okay. That's okay. We'll figure it out when we get in.
Yeah, what's interesting with mine, Belinda, is I pulled it from configuration packages, so the first 2 rows are kind of scrapped. Like, you don't really need them, you just need the table. So
that's cool.
A lot interesting on how it shows it there.
I could dig it. I could dig it. So one of the things I'm going to do just to start this out, because I would get in trouble from everyone in the Power BI space, is I need to go through like some correct data modeling procedures. Now I'm doing this in Excel so I can create Excel tables or Excel worksheets. But that being said, the query editor is almost exactly the same between the 2 products. So you could, everything that I do in Excel query editor, you can do in Power BI editor. I think the Power BI editor you could do a little bit more, but I think that's probably just because it comes out more frequently. So one of the things I'm going to do correct data modeling is I'm just right mouse clicking in the blank space. So I'm going to create some groups. So group number 1, I'm going to call a lookup table, and these are also called dimension tables. So I'm just going to put dim there as well. So now I have a group for lookup dim, and then I'm also going to come in and create a new group for my data tables, which are also called fact tables. Now most people will go through and they'll call their groups like dim groups or fact groups, and sometimes they even go so far as to name the tables like dim customer, and I don't like that. And you know, you guys know me, it's all about what Belinda likes, right? So I don't like it because the user experience is a little tougher for them. I mean, you two have been working with customers for a long time. You know customers that if you called it dim customers, you're gonna get all kinds of questions, right? So we want to call it something that makes sense. Not that we're picking on customers, but you know how the deal goes. Then I also like to create a group called refresh only, because as I work on these and I append them together, I'll want to kind of combine the data sets. I don't know if we'll get fully into that today, but I mostly just want to focus on getting these right. So let's start with what I call Belinda's 3 rules. And you guys have heard me say them multiple times until you're sick. The first one is you name something, give the query a name that makes sense. So I'm going to call this GP chart of accounts. And now that I've done that, let me find the chart of accounts. Table 5. Thank you. And we'll call this BC chart of accounts. Okay, so now I have 2 that I am working with, and that'll make a lot more sense. Oh, you know what I ought to do temporarily is just temporarily. So we'll move those up and start taking a gander at them. Okay, Jen, so, oh, you cleaned up the columns. You're nice, because I know that query has more than 36 columns, right? No, you didn't. You
No,
didn't clean it up. Good. Okay.
no.
All right. Well, not a bad
I
thing.
left all the garbage for you.
Thank you. One of the things that you're going to notice here, so as we go through Belinda's 3 rules, is out of the box, Power BI will, and the query editor in Excel and the query editor in Power BI tries to change the data types for us if it possibly can. So you can see that some of these it tried to find, but some are like A, B, C, 1, 2, 3, so it couldn't get them all. So I want to point that out. There are a lot of people who do not want it setting the data types. They want to set it for them. So just keep that in mind. There are times I do things where I will remove the automatic changing of the data types, but overall I like it. And that has to do with rule number 3. So let's do rule number 2. Rule number 2 is we get rid of columns we don't need. So I'm going to just click on choose column from the home tab, and we are going to pick and choose the columns we want. I have a feeling I want a lot less than 36. So I'm going to select the ones that I think, and let's talk about them as we go along, Jen.
Yeah, so I think active was one you might have bypassed.
Okay.
Even if it's just filtering it out. You've got main account segment, and then there is going to be fields. There'll be segment 1, 2, 3, up to 7, depending on your account framework, that you'll have fields that if your chart of accounts can hold 7 characters, or 7 segments, or 6 segments, you're going to see more than 3. That will also include the main. So I don't know if you would also want both 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah.
In case people want to parse it out without having to look at this account number as a string of 3 segments.
That's a good point. And I think it's 10 that you could have in GP, right? 10 segments? Yeah.
Could be.
Yep.
It's been
10
a while
segments.
since anybody's needed more than 6.
Yeah.
Me, so I thought it was 7, but it's been a while.
Yeah, I think it's 10. You can have up to 10. One of the things you need to keep in mind, though, is if you select this and you try to use it, if you're a partner and you try to use it on a different customer, if they have different segments, if they have 5 segments, you're going to be missing segment 4 and 5.
Yeah.
So, but that also makes it a good reason to click on the choose columns, because this is actually, you notice I have, when I finish, I have my my view formula on that I got to by clicking on view and then show formula bar. And when I finish this, you're going to see like the applied step will be called remove other columns. So basically I'm just telling it the columns I want to keep. That's interesting. We could do this, or we could just break down the account number. Why don't we break down the account number?
Sure.
And you know what? And then I'll take out that one as well. Okay, so on doing these, Jen, there is this account category, and I hate that the view calls it the number, because one of the things that we do now is we, rule number 3 is we go through and verify the data type for each one of these. And first of all, account number needs to be a string, because you might have leading zeros on some of your accounts. So, and you might have dashes in decimal places. So make sure it's a string. But on the account category, so how do you typically work with people using the account category?
Until Power Query and Power BI came along and the Belinda method of doing dashboards, I probably ignored account category other than getting it right for some basic mapping of account to type. I probably didn't give it a lot of thought. It was not widely adopted or utilized, or well, there wasn't really a lot of a reason to use it. I think the out-of-the-box advanced financials module I've literally never opened it because I've never had a client that used it. They either used FRX or more recently, I'm dating myself, Management Reporter, and it just didn't really use category at all.
Yeah.
Now that we're getting into Power Query and doing more financial slicing and dicing, and I've seen a lot of your presentations, Belinda, in particular, where you're starting to place a little more emphasis on category as a way to group things for financial presentation. That is the first legit use of it that I've seen, and
I agree.
it's valid. So I'm starting to change my mind. You have I think it was 49 categories out of the box. You can add more. They just don't have a number, but they have a name which would come through. That you could be a little more specific and have them almost mapped to financial statement rows for grouping purposes if you want.
I like that. I like it when they're using the most detailed row in the most detailed financial statement row. You're absolutely right. I love that. And also, we should point out, I'm going to just temporarily select unit accounts here. Unit accounts don't have an account category. So one of the things that I like to do, a lot of people think that non-financial category is unit accounts, but it is not. As you can see, unit account has no category. So one of the things that I like to do is right mouse click, replace the value, and if the value is blank, I'll put in unit account as unit accounts as a category. And then what that does for me now is I no longer need the account type, so I can get rid of it.
Right, but it might also have allocation accounts, which maybe just to back up for the PC users, this might not make much sense. We can talk with Kristen about how much there is a similar thing. There's basically posting accounts, which are your actual chart of accounts for all intents and purposes, and then unit accounts are statistics kinds of things, head count, square footage, other things, especially if you want to use them in formulas to allocate costs. And then there are things called allocation accounts, like the two that Belinda has, and there's a couple of different types within GP, but I think they both come through as the same type in this example, where you can allocate costs based on other attributes, essentially. From analysis, the allocation accounts will never have a balance or a transaction against them. They kind of get looked at and calculated and they disappear. But they're going to be in your chart of accounts list. They might be something you just filter out.
I totally agree with what well, everything you said, but the ending part is exactly how I would do my modeling. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. If you wanted to have that information of what are your allocation accounts, I would model that separately so that I could get the breakdown of them. So I could see when this is used, this is where it goes, because that would be the full information. In this particular case, nothing is ever going to get posted to it, so why have allocation accounts in the chart of account list? Because if you selected that, if you filtered on that, you're not going to get anything anyhow. So
yeah, and I think that's important for people to know. If you use allocation accounts, and if you're familiar with this, you might have an edit list or a posting journal that shows that's where it was posted, but it actually doesn't appear in history because it doesn't actually go to that account. It's not like it goes in and then goes out.
Correct.
It's used for the purpose of determining where it goes, and then it goes to the right accounts. It's kind of a shape-shifting little thing. And
because of that, I just changed my filter to exclude it, and now this is a worthless column. So let's skip over to BC for a moment. Let's do rule number 2. We've got 42 columns here. And one of the things I noticed right away, Kristen, is that we have, like, in the account type, we actually have a breakdown of headers and beginning totals and so forth. So that's kind of interesting. One of the things that we could do, we also have account categories here. So the account category, that's actually a field inside of BC.
Yeah, so the account category of Business Central is slightly different than what it is in GP. So what we were just looking at before with Jen's data is the account category was broken down by like cash, accounts receivables, different things like that. Well, in Business Central, the account category is either going to be assets, liabilities, equity, income, cost of goods sold, or expense. And then those categories, as you know them in GP, become a subcategory in Business Central.
Gotcha. Okay, and then, so one of the things, first of all, let's go do rule number 2. Get rid of the, on the home menu, choose columns, get rid of some of the unnecessary ones. I'm going to unmark everything. I'm going to leave the global dimensions out there for now because we talked about that. Blocked, I think that's active and inactive, right?
Correct.
Okay.
It's probably, I think the data when you pull it is going to be true or false, but
Okay.
blocked is going to be that inactive, yep.
And let me get the posting groups for just a moment, and I'm going to skip the VAT stuff. Is there anything else that you could think of that I need beyond posting groups and the blocked? I mean, we could always go back and get it.
Did you get the account type? Up at the top.
Yes, I
There.
did. Okay.
Yep.
All right, cool. So I'm going to reduce that down. Now we got 14. Okay. So we talked about we have basically some header and beginning total numbers there. We have the account category, whether it's income or balance, the typical credit, basically blocked. This would be, we'll call this inactive just to make them the same, or blocked. Well, inactive. Okay, and then we have one thing that's very different in BC over GP. Looks like I don't need that number 2, so we'll get rid of that in a moment. One thing that's different is these posting groups. So what's the, I kind of think of them similar to classes.
Yeah, they are very similar to classes, and I would say coming from GP, this was one of the hardest concepts for me to wrap my head around, and probably even a lot of clients that are coming off GP as well. Because in GP, you know it as a class. When you have that class ID, that class window open, and you click on accounts, you have all your accounts there. Well, in Business Central, it's called a posting group. So you have posting groups for vendors, customers, bank accounts, products, inventory, different things like that need to be populated. So what we're seeing here is just the 3 posting groups that are actually shown on the chart of accounts window, which is the general posting type, general business posting group, and general product posting group. So if those account numbers exist on any of those, then we're going to see it on this window here.
Okay, and then we have this general posting type. This is kind of like, what is the general posting type?
The general posting type specifies the general posting type to use when posting to this account. That's the description within Business Central, right? Okay. So really what that means is this account used for purchases, sales, or settlements? And I don't have very many people who actually populate that. We just leave it blank. It's more informational, I believe, than anything else at this point.
So that would be very similar to the posting detail for a GP, where you could say this one is used in sales, this one's used in purchasing, or this is used in both. So that's kind of interesting. I'm going to go back and get rid of the general posting type and the number 2. Let's see. There we go. Okay. Cool. Now, also we have these dimension codes, and I don't think this one is used any for, or be set up for account numbers. So, you want to give us a glimpse into the world of dimension codes?
Yeah, definitely. So if you want to just quick open up the GP one just so we can get a visual here.
Okay.
So in GP, you have what's called segments. So in this data here in the account number, we have 3 segments, and it looks like the second segment is for the natural account, and then the first segment could be company, and the third could be department or vice versa, right? In Business Central, when you're talking about the chart of accounts, you're talking about just setting up that natural account. So when we look in that first column there, that's just the natural accounts. And then we have a concept called dimensions. And there's 2 globals, global 1, global 2, that show up everywhere within the system. So typically what we'll see there is company, department, different things like that. And then you also have, in addition to the 2 globals, you have up to 6 shortcut dimensions as well. So if you're on GP today, and Jen mentioned earlier, she's had a client that's had up to 6 segments before, and that is definitely including the natural. So if that client was to come on to Business Central, they would have the natural account number set up as their chart of accounts. They would have 2 global dimensions, and then they would have 3 shortcut dimensions.
Okay. Cool.
It's nice because your chart ends up being smaller and I would think a lot more manageable than the GP chart in general. I've always liked the thought of having dimensions separate. Instead of you need every combination and your chart just grows exponentially.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, and I like that it's used universally. So, Kristen, something I've wondered, and this is true particularly when we're talking about customers or vendors. If I, like the inventory one here, if I were to set up in BC a global dimension for inventory, every time this account is used, would it populate global 1?
Yeah, it would. So there is a concept in Business Central called default dimensions, and you can set that up at a chart of accounts level, which is what you're looking at right now, or you could set it up at an inventory level as well. So for those folks who are coming from GP and have different item classes that hit different GL accounts for revenue and inventory and cost of goods sold, you would set it up at an inventory item level rather than setting it up at a chart of accounts level.
Okay, cool.
So, totally different concept. It is a little bit harder to figure out where those defaults need to happen. Whereas in GP, everything is just one account number, so it does make it a little bit easier.
Yeah, and I see that our account number, and this is, Kristen's going to start laughing at me now. This is the single biggest thing in BC that makes me absolutely crazy, is that the master number, like we're used to account ID in GP or customer ID or customer number, in all the records they label the field for that master no. I call it no because it makes me crazy, but it's for number. So technically this is the account number, so I hate that they call everything no. I noticed though that this was set to, and I didn't mean to change the type there. I didn't. Okay. So this is set to a whole number, and this I want set to a text. I like having them to a text. So I'm going to go back to where that change step was right here on my applied steps, and you could see it turned it to an integer type, our whole number. Now I'm going to come in and change this to text, and I'm going to say yes, I want to insert the step, and it recognizes, hey, we try to change it, so do you want to replace that step or add a new? And I'm going to replace. That way if there were any leading zeros that got dropped, it gets put back, and now I can come back to the total. So now let's do just a couple things real quick based on what we just learned on these. I'm going to take the account number here, and I'm going to go up to add column, and what I'm going to do is, and I should have done it this way, I'm going to just right mouse click and duplicate the column, and now for my account number column I will right mouse click again, and I'm going to separate these, split column by delimiter by that dash. So there's the dash delimiter, and I want it for each occurrence. And now you'll get a better idea what I was talking about. See how the leading numbers disappeared? And that's because it tried to figure out the data type for me. But I'm going to remove that step. Now I get them all back. And now I could call this department. And this is my natural account or my main segment. And this is my sub account, which I may or may not even want. So now I have all of those set. Now let's do something else that we learned here. So we have these categories here. One of the things that we could do, first of all, we don't need anything with a heading in it. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the headings. And I think I want to remove the totals. Actually,
and total, beginning total. You just really want posting, right?
Yeah, but I'm going to cheat on the other. So there, yeah, I don't want totals. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep the beginning total and I'm going to keep the posting. And I know you're probably going, Kristen, what in the heck is Belinda doing? So now what I'm going to do, I have search name and I have account type. So what I'm going to do, I don't need the search name column, but I do want to keep what the search name for the beginning total is. So I'm going to quickly add in a conditional column, and I'm going to call this account group. And I'm going to say if the account type, and well, I'll do the equals. I just have to make sure I spell correctly, which is a very big chore for me, is begin total. Then I want to get the column from the search name, otherwise I want it to leave it blank. And so now I have all of these nulls, and I'm going to make this a text field. And now what I'm going to do is replace the nulls with blanks. Actually, maybe I can do what I want to do with nulls. I'm going to fill down. Yeah, that worked for me. So now all of those that are in the total are set up with whatever grouping that they exist. Now it probably is already one of the other ones that we have, but that's just a cool
account
thing.
Category.
Yeah.
Hopefully it matches with that account category.
Yeah. All right. Well, so it does. So I just wanted to show that because I think it's really cool. Okay. So you know what? We'll just we'll get rid of those two, and in the conditional column. Let me go back and get rid of the account type. Oh, wait a minute. I want down here. So actually, I want to get rid of search name, that, and oh, I should get rid of beginning total now too, shouldn't I? Since I got rid of that. And let's see. Okay, when you get yourself in a mess, delete it and start over. Okay, so now I want to get rid of search, account, and I think that's it. Okay, so we'll get rid of those two.
So search name, interestingly enough, looked more like GP's account category. It looked pretty specific.
So the search name is going to automatically default to whatever you put in for the account name. You can change it though. So what I like see people do is more customer and vendor. Sometimes they know, their vendor by like an acronym or something like that. So they'll put that in the search name. So when they're searching for that vendor or customer, they can find it quicker.
Gotcha.
Cool. All right, so that covers the chart of accounts. You guys have any other comments you want to make about those? What I'm going to do is make sure that the column names are the same and then just append them on top of each other. And so, I'll have that nice little list. No comments?
No.
Okay, cool. All right, and then, so now let's talk about the GL transactions. And by the way, we'll go till either we finish all of these or an hour and a half, whichever comes first. Okay, so we have GL transactions from GP, and so we'll call this GP GL transactions. And then that would be table, this one, right?
That one's going to be table 10, I believe.
Yep. I think so too, yeah. Okay, whoops. BC GL transactions. So this time let's start with BC. Okay, so we have 56 columns out here. We have our journal entry number, our account number, the posting date, the document type, the originating document type, and the originating document number. So that's interesting that that's right up front along with the description. And interestingly enough, we have amount here, which if it's negative, it's credit, and if it's positive, it's debit. I think you could pull in some of those, right, though? I mean, pull in the debit and credit, depending on what you're looking at.
Right.
Okay, so let's look at GP for a moment. Because in GP, we start with the journal entry number. We have a series, but if I were to scroll over, we would have to go all the way to originating stuff to get to like the originating master ID, the originating document number, which would be called a control number, and, or sorry, that was company for intercompany, master ID, master name, and we'd have to get to some of those and then skip back to the transaction date. So that's something that's a little bit different. I love using the detail from I call it a subledger, from the originating source. In BC, we've got to scroll, do you remember that? You could get right to, can you get to the customer number from here? Like a customer number and vendor number?
I don't believe so.
Interesting. That is quite fascinating. You would have to, I did not know that, Kristen. Mm-hmm. I think you're exactly right. I think we would have to link to another table in order to get to the customer number or the vendor number, depending upon where it came from.
Right. So if we had more time, we would want to link that to either the customer ledger entry table or the vendor ledger entry table, and it's based on that, where that document number is. The PS is for purchase. No, hold on. I'm going to say that wrong. Give me 1 second to verify that.
I think. Well, we have the source code, so we could figure out. Where
so
it came from.
The PS is sales. So we could put some logic in there. The PS means a posted. PS is posted sales invoice. Where if it was just a P, it would be purchase invoice posted. Yeah. So depending on how detailed you wanted to get, you could utilize the number series in Business Central and make those unique to help you with your reporting.
Oh, so you could flat out make you could make a uniqueness between sales and payables. So
right. So
interesting.
Yeah, so you can use number series. So if you look in the description next to it where it says invoice S, that S means sales.
Gotcha.
So that's how you can tell that came from the sales module. So it's a little bit different than GP, and this is, again, like one of the most confusing things about Business Central is the number series. So when you're creating, let's just say sales invoice right here, you're creating a sales invoice and it gives it a number, S-INV. When you post it, it gives it a different number, PS-INV. Now they get linked together, you can see that here, but it does get a new number. So that's just the out-of-the-box settings. There are ways to kind of make that so that they are the same, if that's what the client wants to see. But that's just a little bit different than GP.
Interesting, because right in GP we have that right there, but the numbering can be entirely different. So because of that, we have this extra column series. Do you use the series column very much, Jen?
At times, but not a ton. It depends on the scenario. For the most part, I don't. I use the originating fields for various things. I use series if I have to validate something that I'm looking at, make sure I'm understanding how all the subledgers post through to the GL maybe.
One thing that I've started doing lately in the world of GP when I'm in here, one of the things that I'm thinking of, and I see Sean on, so I'm hoping Sean will chip in on both sides since he straddles the fence too. One of the things that I've been doing more lately is if it comes from payroll, I've been extracting it out after I get all the columns format and then make payroll its own link and then append them back together. That way I could aggregate payroll by not by journal entry number, but by posting date and account. And then that way in the Power BI report, there's no payroll detail. Everything is completely aggregated. So you're getting rid of some of the users' names because, I mean, just the fact that it's there is, let me load more. And by the way, when you're looking at the query editor here, all the data, it's not even in cache. You're just getting a snapshot of a certain amount of data. Typically it's 1,000 rows, but depending how many columns you have, it could be a lot less. Okay, so if I came over here and I went to that master ID.
Yeah, and it's a good point because there's a lot of confidential. It depends, like from my perspective in Canada, where more likely than not my clients are using Canadian payroll, and I have not been a US payroll user. Canadian payroll actually has an option to post in summary so that it just posts one entry per payroll, which is essentially just the journal entry, so there isn't detail, but your payroll setup might be in detail, and it's important to understand if that's there because you might want detail for some things, but you might be hiding, say, master ID and master name if series is payroll or something like that, if you needed the detail for some other reason, but not to make it anonymous. More likely than not, I agree with where you were going up. You would consolidate that into something that is definitely not confidential.
Right. I just think that's a smarter move. So, okay. So both of those are really interesting. So there are a couple more things that I feel like we should probably talk about in the land of general ledger, if you will. Let me first go through and remove some of the columns, remove a lot of the columns. There's 121 columns. We do not want that many. And I'm just going to grab a few of these. Actually, the account description. And oh, this is a cool, interesting thing. So, Kristen, I'll be curious how BC handles this. The account, I usually pull the account description from the account master because somehow the account description gets saved with the journal entry line in GP, and I don't want, if I aggregate, I don't want it aggregating to the same account number twice because I had two names. I just want it to come from one name. What happens in BC, Kristen, if the account changes? I mean, I guess you're just getting it still from the account, or do you even know yet? I mean, not.
So, like, if someone goes into the account card and actually changes the description after something's been posted?
Yeah.
I know that if you change the account number, that no field, as you refer to it, that does roll down. And the account description, I'm going to assume, but yet I shouldn't assume that that's going to roll down as well. Never had to actually look at that.
And I'd have to look. I don't have my GP running. I'd have to look at the tables because I wonder if this is just more of a quirk in the view that it's joining multiple sources.
Maybe.
But I get what I get. That's an interesting option when we get into customers and vendors, because there's certainly a lot of tables on the GP side where the customer name, or vendor name changes over time, and the table stores what it was at that time. So whether you're getting it from the master table or from the transaction table, you will get different results. And sometimes you need one for one reason and the other for another.
Cool. So GP. So Jen, I see for the GP transactions, there's voided transactions. So let's talk about what a voided transaction in the world of GP is.
Right. So I would say in general, it's not super common to void at a general ledger level, but that is a feature. They added it in GP 10 or 2010 or something. I don't know that I've had any clients that actually void a journal entry, and even the sample data, you can see that there isn't any that say yes. That being said, any table that you have that has a voided flag, you're going to want to likely exclude voids and look for them, even if your data doesn't happen to have any, because you'd hate for something to sneak in and you find out by accident that the numbers are wrong because somebody did void one thing and it actually got included in the results.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to back up on when you were removing columns is, again, Canada, we're more likely to have multi-currency transactions, and there are fields in all of the transaction tables that we'll come across that are the originating are kind of the source, but also on the pure multi-currency, the originating debit, the originating credit, the currency ID, and possibly exchange rate fields can be relevant depending on your purpose. Sometimes you might just want to report in functional data. Sometimes you might need to know what the originating data is, maybe more importantly on, say, sales or purchases sides of things. You might need both.
Yes, thank you. Excellent point. And sitting firmly in South Carolina and no longer being in New York, we don't do anything down here multi-currency. So, yeah.
I'm just keeping you honest. There
I know, I appreciate
one country in the world.
I appreciate that. So, yeah, so that void is voided transactions. And I have actually seen a couple of customers void transactions. That what they've done is, like, especially in implementing GP, they'll post transactions in like payables, and if you have that they can't delete a transaction in the general ledger, they have to void it. So before it gets posted in the general ledger, they're like, well, I'm going to just enter this number in, so I'm going to void these. And then they end up with voided transactions in the general ledger. And that makes me happier when I'm trying to find a variance between the payables module in the general ledger than the ones who just flat out delete it because you don't know it's deleted. So you definitely have some issues you have to do some hunting. Can you void transactions in the general ledger that are unposted in BC, or does it just delete? Kristen, do you know?
So did you say unposted or?
Unposted, yeah. Can you void them, or do you just delete them?
You just delete them, and then if they're posted, you do what's called reverse. So it's not really like a quote-unquote void like it is in GP. It's called reverse in Business Central.
Okay, cool. All right, and then let's see. Let me get that. And
voids are interesting in general, right? Because there's so many different. You really have to understand the purpose of the report. Sometimes the whole point is to be monitoring exceptions to your data, and you might want to know who's voiding transactions to check if it's a valid thing that should have been voided and follow up with them. You might want the voids in. You just need to make sure that you flag them. For other purposes, you might not want them in because they make the data not match other internal reports.
Yep, that's true. That's true. But you definitely got to pay attention to verifying that you need to acknowledge them. Otherwise, you're going to be looking at potentially wrong data. Now, another thing about the entries in the general ledger have to do with year-end closings, and BC handles this dramatically different than I got to do my precautionary save. So I'm going to close and well, I don't want to do that yet. I'll just wait. Okay. So let's talk about the GP close. So when we're closing out entries, and actually all dates, if you have a date time field where the time is populated, you should make those separate date fields, a date column and a time column. You will be much happier in the world of BI. Okay, so that being said, so let's talk about NGP identifying year-end entries and what exactly a year-end entry means.
Yeah, and the sample data that I got is probably not the best example of it, but it's combining, so if I back up a little bit, the GL transactions view that I pulled automatically combines open year and historical year, closed year transaction information. The tables actually have slightly different column names, as you see with Belinda where she is right now. The historical tables have a history year column and the open table has an open year column instead of just calling it, say, fiscal year in both. So at some point we would combine those two so we have one column to say what's the fiscal year. Even the data, you can see I have 2027 and I have 20. So obviously there's something funky going on with the data.
I think because you can name it. You can name the years in GP fiscal period, so it looks like the name. It doesn't just take on like the year itself. Yeah. You could get
the sample data. I mean, all three of us would be familiar with the GP sample data. It has multiple open years, which any accountant would cringe at if there's multiple years of open transactions and nobody has closed the year. But essentially, there will be also an entry when you run a year-end close. It creates the entry which is closing out your P&L accounts into your balance sheet and brings balances forward and things like that. And it at that point moves it into the other table. So you would have years populated in history. And if you click on the drop-down list for history year, I don't know if
there was
any
one.
years had been closed.
There was one.
I often try to close one or two just to have something closed, but it's often just such messy data to begin with.
One of the things I like to do in GP when I have these two columns here is, first of all, I'll come in and highlight them both and replace the null with blanks. Because if the year's open, the history column will be null, and if the year's closed, I got to change them to text first. Okay, that was it. Text, which is okay with me to change them to text, and now I can replace values. And if it's a historical year, then the open year is null. But then, okay, so now they're automatically blank, and what I like to do is then merge the column together and put no separator in and call it fiscal year. And then now I can see all of my fiscal years together. And the ones that are blanks, those should be unposted transactions.
Hopefully.
Yeah. Yeah, or we have bad data.
Bad data.
But this data in the world of GP has definitely, it's been created with text so often, it very likely could be bad data. So where is that?
Yeah, and actually,
there you work.
A good point on that it might be unposted. That document status column, I think, was the indicator in this case that it was not posted. That's an interesting consideration because it does include all statuses of transactions when you export it. And again, depending on your reporting, you may or may not want not posted data to be included.
Let's get rid of the
Yeah.
unposted data. Okay, so we've talked about in the world of GP, if you're closing the year out, that it rolls the balances forward. So that's the whole journal entry that happens, is the balances roll forward into the new year, and an entry gets created. So how do we identify those particular entries? So if we're just looking at net change.
Sorry, I was just answering a question on a LinkedIn chat, someone who couldn't get into here. Just repeat that question, my bad.
Oh, yeah, no, thank you for helping them find their way.
Yeah.
So we know that in the world of GP, all of the balance sheet accounts roll forward to a new year, and that's the journal entry that appears. So how do we identify those entries?
Typically the period, I would use period ID. You can see the reference being beginning balance, but period ID 0 is what is technically the beginning balance, and the rest of the periods should be valid periods in your fiscal year. In Fabricam, it is a 12-month fiscal year, so a traditional January to December. But however many fiscal periods you have, if you're not calendar year based or a monthly based, you'll have valid numbers. 0 will always be beginning balances. So you may filter them out, you may not. It depends on how you're handling beginning balances in general on reports.
And it dates at the last day of the previous year, which is outside your year. So one of the things that I like to do is take this year column, and I will come through. Yeah, I'm going to have to do it this way. And I will create a BBF date, because I want the beginning balance to be in the proper year. If I put in a date range and I just look at the year-to-date balances for December 31st without paying attention to the period numbers, then they're going to be doubled, because it's going to take the balance brought forward for the new year. So what I'll do is come in and do a little M code, which if you know me, you know I try to stay away from M code, but I want to add 1 day to it, and I think that'll get it right. So we see 12/31, and now I have 1/1, and now I have this date filled, and now I could do a conditional statement that says transaction date. And then if the period is 0, then I'll get the BBF column. Actually, they're more likely to be not 0, so I'll say is not 0. Then I'll get the transaction date column. Otherwise, I'll get the BBF column. And then now I have it in the right period. Yeah. And so, what were you going to say?
No, I'm just, I like that approach.
Yeah, and then that way now when I look at my years, otherwise you're going to end up, if you're just looking at transactions by dates and you're not looking at your fiscal period, numbers are going to be in a weird mess. Now, in the case of Business Central, Kristen was part of my search. So Kristen, I'm just going to include you in the conversation. And I'm going to show people where it is. In GP, we talk about this so much, and it doesn't look like I have a year closed in here. So we want to keep that in mind, but let me open up my BC. And find my entries. I might need your help getting me to where I need to go. I want to get to general ledger entries. So I guess
I just go to the search and look for it. Or you can go there too. But that's a new feature. It doesn't look like you have turned on. So you'll want to go up to the lookup and just look up GL entries. And I think what you're looking for here is that source code where it says close income. Is that right?
Yes. That's exactly what I'm looking for. Because, and I don't even see, nothing to show. Okay, isn't that special?
Yeah, so
Also,
general ledger entries is what you're going to want to type into that search bar.
oh, the whole thing? General ledger
Yeah.
entries? Okay.
There you go.
I probably could have just looked up entries and got to it. Okay. And yeah, so I think I have some on mine. I think I closed a year out. And this is something, because I asked, coming from the landed GP, I asked so many people, and now I don't even see that column. I'd have to add it.
There's the fourth one from the bottom, I can tell is a close entry because it has a C.
Yes, thank you. So in GP, and I'm glad you pointed that out. So in BC, I kept asking people, where does it, how do you identify a closing period? And everyone kept saying, oh, there's a C in front of it, but that only happens in the application. It doesn't happen on the data. And then, so I was talking with BC developers, and I said, okay, how do I identify a closing entry? And they said, I forgot what time it was, but on the date time field that you're seeing here, it has a different time. But that also doesn't come over when you're working on data in BC. So I was just like all over the place. So I even asked some people on the MVP thread, and the next thing I know, Will Thompson from Power BI is reaching out to me going, what do you need? And I'm like, nothing that you could help me with. It has to do with BC data, not Power BI. So finally someone said, let's experiment. And because it just wasn't a field that a lot of people typically use, because they were used to being able to see it look like this. Because I don't understand the closing entries in BC, but it closes out everything, so it's going to affect every account. So you need to make sure you exclude it. And thank you for putting that in the chat. Because what you'd want to do here is, whoops. Well, that wasn't very smart. Do it again, Belinda. Does not equal, and it's not in this list, but I'm going to put it in anyhow. CLS income. That's what you're looking for, and that will fix it. And actually, I've been doing some coaching with someone who's had years of data, and when we were rebuilding a Power BI report and I had him do it that way, the number was different, and they did research and found out that what I gave them was right and that the way they'd been doing it was incorrect, which was kind of astounding. But on the general ledger, so is there anything in here that also identifies the fiscal period? Did I remove that, or are we just looking at the date?
We're just looking at the dates.
Okay, interesting. Okay, that works for me. All right. And I'm totally okay with that. So if someone's on a fiscal period, typically you're going to be setting up a different date field anyhow, so that I'm totally okay with that, because even in GP, I find that the fiscal year, it's not really a field. I combine it, but it's not really a field that I would need to use because I'm typically going to get it from my date table anyhow. So, all right, cool. Meet O Torpedo. Okay, love that. Can you guys think of anything else we need to know about the GP and BC? Or the GL?
Now, if you were merging the two early on, you had noted that BC has just an amount column instead of debit credit.
Yeah.
GP doesn't, so you would probably either split one out or merge.
Yeah, and you can get it. I'm glad you brought that up, Jen, because you can get it. I have an opinion on the way I like to see it, but for some of the reporting you guys are doing, are you more content with seeing the data combined into one net field, or do you like it separated into debit and credit?
I like it net, but I've dealt with clients that they want to see debit credit. They don't want to see just the amount field, because that's just how they're used to it.
Mm-hmm.
I would say net. Most of the reporting I've done out of the GL, debit credit is irrelevant and just adds complexity. So the first thing everybody asks me is, can we just have one column for net amount? I'm like, yep.
Right. And can I just say before we move on, Belinda, one last thing. So if you are a GP customer coming from GP to Business Central and you're wanting to merge data, there's a couple things that I would think about first off. A lot of the implementations I've done bringing GL history into Business Central, we've just done summary data. So maybe you're building this report, Belinda, because you want to see it more at a detail level. So you're looking at GP and BC at detail level. So you're going to want to possibly restrict out some specific document numbers for the GL data that came over at a summary level in Business Central, just so that you're not having transactions duplicated. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so when would I see that? Where and when would I see those?
So in Business Central, when you're bringing over that historical GL data from GP, I like to use specific document numbers. So within that document number column right there, you would just restrict out whatever those transaction numbers are, document numbers for, whatever it was when you brought it over from GP. So right there, like the 01-2018, 01-2019, that's the structure I've used in the past. So I would just remove those so that they're not in my data source and getting duplicated with what was already done in GP.
Oh, okay. So those could be potentially duplicates. So if you've migrated, you want to be careful if you're combining data sets with the from source. So if you've migrated from GP or from other source to BC, to prevent duplication, you'd want to bring that out. That's a good point, because if you can combine data sets, so you can combine your old data with your new data. Even in the case of like BC or some other tool that was on-prem, or even BC on-prem, you can get and because it's very common in the world of BC, well, NAV particularly, some upgrades you do re-implementations instead of just upgrading the data. So that's a pretty common thing. So if you want to connect to both sources so that you can have all the data in one report here, you can, but you just need to be careful about making sure you exclude any kind of summaries you brought in so you don't duplicate those. That's an excellent point. Yeah, okay, cool. Very cool. All right, so we are obviously not going to get through everything. So I want to cover a few more topics. Why don't we do customers? So I'm going to grab customers, because man, time has flown. I've actually had a lot of fun doing this. I don't know about you guys, but this has been cool. So I'm going to call this GP customers, and I've learned some stuff, so that's cool. I always learn from you too. And I recognize this as GP
15 is going to be customers.
Customers, okay. And that would be BC. So one of the things I see in the customer list here for BC is it looks like Trey Research is in here twice. And that's because of the contact, right? Is different in the address?
Go back to that first column. I think that they actually have,
So they have different account numbers.
Yeah, and that could be just because I named it the same for some reason long ago. I don't believe out of the box that they're the same.
Oh, okay.
Perhaps. Yeah.
Okay. So it's kind of interesting, though, that in most everything that we'll talk about here applies for customers and vendors at the same time. But one thing that's kind of unique is there's a lightweight customer relationship management piece inside of Power BI, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's not something that we get inside of GP. So that's kind of interesting to me. And
right.
So, okay, cool. And I'm just gonna add just a few columns here to talk about. So we have address the same, and telex, that's funny. What is budgeted amount? We don't have that in GP.
That is a good question. Let me go ahead and open, because I have not used that before. So that actually is a field in the table, but it's not showing. It's not showing in here out of the box on that window, so you'd have to personalize it. But if I had to take a stab at it, I'm going to guess that at a budgeting level, you can say, hey, for this customer, we're budgeting to, revenue at $10,000.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
So that's what that budget would be.
That's pretty cool. And then for Jen, I know we have customer class, which is something that we talked big picture on, but we didn't get into some of the detail on that. I'm also going to get, no, I'm not going to get customer balance. So how do people tend to use customer class in GP? What are some of the ways that you've seen?
Well, the functionality, just for the BC folks, the functionality on customer class in GP is essentially for driving either reporting or faster setup of customers, defaulting a lot of the values for customers that have consistent settings. So where there are settings differences, it's often different payment terms, different tax setup, and like geography potentially. In Fabricam, it tends to use geography, so you can see Canada, USA, Australia as classes. That's way more detailed than I would typically see in a actual implementation. But same with vendors. It's for me the most common, I think, is combination of payment terms and tax status, whether they are charged HST or not, or whether they charge us HST or not, or something like that.
Or default accounts, yeah.
Default accounts, yeah. So anything that makes setting the customer or the vendor up quicker, having a different group makes sense, and those are probably the most common. Payables, there might be a few more things you'd consider. Right. Frequency of payment, frequency of statements on the customer side.
So before we go back to the BC data, we also have hold data. So the hold option for a customer. And vendors have it, and then vendor invoices have it. So can you talk to those, Jen?
Sure. Yeah, there's functionality to put a customer on hold or a vendor on hold entirely, like at the customer vendor level. So, if you're from a vendor side, you couldn't pay them. From a customer side, you couldn't invoice them, that kind of thing. There's also options just to put transactions on hold. So maybe a vendor invoice you have a dispute with, you might put that invoice on hold. So in the transaction table, there would be a hold, and the vendor itself you're still able to pay the vendor. All the rest, you won't accidentally pay something that there's a dispute on. On the customer side, it's the same functionality. I'm kind of struggling to think of maybe how you would use putting a individual transaction on hold, unless it's just not approved or there's a credit limit issue or something like that at a transaction level. You'll see it in all the tables.
So in BC, let's talk about the comparison to classes and talk about the hold option. So I realize now I should have put in the global dimensions. Okay, so we've got global dimensions, Kristen, that we talked about, and the posting groups for account numbers. Oh, and here they're populated, we could see, for each customer. But can you extend beyond these, Kristen, in BC?
Extend beyond them how? Sorry.
I mean, what if I wanted more options like this? Can I add other dimensions besides these two?
So yes, you can. So there's different options within Business Central where, and I'm just going to open up the window here so I talk intelligently on the verbiage, but there's something called value posting. So at a dimension level, you can say this specific vendor should always hit the sales department, should always hit global to be small, right? So there's a code mandatory where you can just say, hey, that code is mandatory no matter what type of transaction it is. And then you can say same code, which is kind of what's happened here is they've hard coded and said, hey, whenever this vendor is used, we want to use these dimensions here. Or you could go and say that there's no code required at all for that specific dimension. So without getting too far into it, it can be as detailed as you need it to be. And what I always tell people during implementation is, you know, if that dimension is 99% of the time going to be the same thing, then let's just put that in so that it doesn't miss. So that's what we're seeing here is it's hard-coded.
Cool.
You mentioned templates in your comment, Kristen.
Yeah, so I just wanted to throw that out there so it didn't get forgot, because we've been throwing around classes a lot, and even though classes in the same verbiage doesn't exist in Business Central, there is what's called templates. So Jen was talking about a class having payment terms, having posting groups, different things like that, or account numbers. In Business Central, that's called templates. So what you can look up, Belinda, is just type in the word, yep, you can go that way too. Go ahead and click that open. And we have a couple of them set up here, but you can see here that you can set them up. Now the difference between GP and Business Central is in GP, if you go in and update something within a class, it could be payment terms, it could be an account number, something like that, it'll ask you if you want to roll down the changes.
Right.
And that doesn't happen in Business Central. You can come in and update it and it'll just, you know, moving forward, whatever you assign to it will get changed. But
so it doesn't even roll, it doesn't auto roll to existing. It literally is just next customer created under the template kind of concept.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Interesting. What about the hold?
Belinda and I.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So the hold is called block on the vendor customer card. So you can block it from being invoiced, or if it's a vendor having a purchase order assigned to it, if it's a customer shipping to it, or you can block all. So it's more like the inactive, but they've rolled up the different transaction types into it as well.
So you could block either by inactivating would be blocked, and so would putting somebody on hold. Okay. See, I wouldn't have, even though that totally makes sense when you say it, I would have never thought about, and I've never thought about hold in VC before anyhow, but that's interesting. What if it was a payables transaction? Can you block a transaction in payables?
Correct. So you can block a vendor as a whole, or you can block at a transactional level as well.
Interesting. Well, that's pretty fascinating. Okay, so we did not get to, can you guys think of anything else for customers that would, that you'd want to include? I love the budgeting. I did not know that even existed.
At a customer level, I guess if I was looking at a report, I'd probably want to know if they are taxable or not for sales tax, and if so, are they, there's a tax liable button in there, and then there's also the tax area codes, the tax exemption numbers, different things like that. But if I was looking to see if I had like a tax exemption form for someone, if they were liable or something like that, that might be useful.
It's kind of interesting to note the differences in the way the data set is structured. I mean, this is technically a Boolean field, just like it is in GP. I mean, it's a checkbox, right? Or a yes/no field. But still yet, we see true and false here, and then it's a Boolean type. And this is a view, so the view does it a little bit differently, but it's interesting. Actually, there's not a taxable field here. The question would be whether a tax schedule exists, right?
A tax schedule well, depending on if you're using Avalara, tax schedule ID would be Avalara, and then it would look at that state field for the ship to kind of determine whether or not you have Nexus in there. So a couple different things.
We often, kind of my approach to configuration in GP, we often create a tax schedule called exempt. So as opposed to leaving it blank where it might just not have been filled out, we often encourage filling something out, and the exempt just wouldn't have any details assigned to it, which are the bits that calculate the actual details.
Interesting.
Right. So in GP, Jen, you would probably assign that out at class level so that it wouldn't get missed.
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty common. That's pretty common. Certainly on the customer side, because your billing is going to be dependent on where they are and things like that, like point of service, point of delivery, things like that.
Cool. So I just replaced the blanks with exempt, and then now I can create a ability. I can't spell worth a darn. Tax schedule does not equal exempt. Then it is yes, otherwise it is no. There we go. So, well, actually what I could have done is true and false.
Right. Yeah, I was going to say that.
Belinda, just a reminder, we have 4 minutes left.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to the screen with all of us. I gotta be me. Okay. I'm going to just go ahead and with what we have now and close and apply and then pull us up on the screen. So ladies, that was a lot of fun for me. I don't know about you. Boy, time went by fast. I can't believe an hour and a half went by that fast. And I know I'm a weirdo. I love accounting data and I love data modeling and making visuals. So that makes me a geek and a nerd. And I know you two are exactly the same way. So that's why we're friends.
Yeah, well, I think we need to set up another time because I want to see the data in Power BI now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
It's gonna be. You know what we'll do is we'll do it after October because I'm gonna be using this in training classes pre-con for Summit. Are you both coming in person to Houston?
We're still not allowed to travel.
Oh yeah, the Canadians are.
But yeah, no, I wouldn't. I'm not going anywhere probably next year either. I'm gonna wait it out.
Yeah, I ordered some N95, new N95 mask because our county, our 7-day average has 3 days ago, it was higher than it's been through this whole thing. Our county, 160 new cases was our 7-day average, and before that, our highest day was January 10th, and it was 143. So yeah. Sean, we should have got you on here too, because you're just a big bud for all of us anyhow. I know, and maybe when we come back and show the data, we can include you on. But yeah, so we'll definitely do that. Next month, everyone, Mariano Gomez, we all know and love Mariano Gomez. He's gonna spend some time with me. I don't have the date set quite just yet, but I was trying to plan that around the Cavallo, formerly known as SalesPad, Elevate dates, but I have decided for multiple reasons that I will not be going to that event, and it makes me very, very sad. But so now I can schedule some other time, and I don't know what that icon is. Are you doing this to me, Sean? I think you are. Yeah, come on, South Carolina, get it together. Yeah. Oh, yay, Egypt. Thank you, Amir. Thank you very much for joining us. As I was saying, Mariana is going to be joining me, and he's going to be showing me some new stuff he's been doing on Power Automate or Power Apps, so that should be a lot of fun. And then what we'll do is at the end of October, we'll schedule time to look at what the class did on the Power BI report, and maybe even do a what if. What if we did this? So, ladies, thank you so much. I am so excited that this happened to be an all-female thing today. We'll include Sean next time. If we have to, we'll put a dress on him. And so,
token male.
Do what?
If we need a token male.
Yeah, occasionally you got to have a token male. That's it used to be token female, so why not, right? Yeah. So we have October planned where we'll come back and look at this in Power BI and talk a little bit more about some of the data modeling between us. You guys are so awesome, both of you two, and I am just so lucky to have you guys as a friend. I haven't talked to you enough through this pandemic, Jen, but and the fact that we play words with friends, and even though lately we've been kind of slow about it, I feel like I'm saying hi to you every time I play a word and every time you kick my fanny. And Kristen, we have slowed down our time together, so we need to pick that back up. Maybe we just need to have coffee one morning together and just chat. So. Okay, ladies, thank you so much, and thank you everybody for attending, and we'll see you next month. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.